Okay, good morning, everyone. So today, as you can see here, I just want to talk about, it's a quick lecture about Fences, the play, and they're there. And there's a movement, specifically within literature and literary theory, where it's called, you compare two texts in what's called comparative literature. So it's very apropos uh, in academic writing today. So, hi everyone. Today I just wanted to do a quick review. The video is only going to be about 5 minutes or so, and talk about how connections, strong connections, can be made between Fences and the novel There. Because I think there are some strong corollaries between the two works. Feel free to use this content to spark any ideas for your final essay for this class. You should, you could compare and contrast any of the characters, the structure of the novel, or the structure of the play, the themes of those two texts, or you could simply compare and contrast the elements of fiction of any of the texts we covered this semester to any other text that we read this semester. I think it's an intriguing, even evocative way to craft an essay within an English class at a university slash college level that requires this level of academic rigor in that comparison. Uh, this quick lecture will also be ideal for our upcoming in-class reader response, which will take place next class, which is March 23rd. It will directly concern itself with today's pared down lecture and the various themes and comparisons and corollaries that I'm going to attempt to draw between the two. It's just a quick review. Um, Listen to it at your leisure and watch it at your leisure and think about it and think about the ideas the concepts that we cover, uh, both for your final essay, which is due April 14th, but also the in-class reader response, which is next class, as I mentioned before. Also, look for grades to be updated by Thursday of this week. Uh, I think we just have one thing that's hanging out there, the short essay. So look for that grade to be updated within Blackboard by Thursday. Okay, let's take a look at comparative literature with the play Fences and Tommy Orange's novel There. So much in the way we spoke about the various characters within There, right? We said it was sort of this mosaic, this panoply of characters that Tommy Orange, the author, is able to dedicate each chapter towards, except for, of course, the first chapter, and then bring them together at the end, and what will culminate into this public cultural event in the powwow. Much in that way, this panoply and the weaving in and out of characters in order to display their frailties and their feebleness in some ways, um, their intellectual challenges, right? Their cultural identity challenges. Much in that way, we also see that within Fences, where we have social commentary of mental health. These are just things I pulled from my last lecture, but I think they bear mentioning in comparison to correlate them to Fences. So Troy's an alcoholic. We see alcoholism is a major theme within There. Mentally disabled brother is part of the sort of the theme driving Troy within the play. Unhealthy relationship with his wife and son and brother. So he has this very unhealthy existence, and we see that within There. Troy engages in unhealthy practices of infidelity. We don't necessarily see a lot of that in There, but there are unhealthy practices that are going on. And Troy has a failed past with this. If you recall, one of the major themes within Fences is the idea that he was unable to achieve what he wanted to achieve in with regard to playing Major League Baseball. He was in the Negro League, right? And was because of the white power structure gatekeepers and the dominance of the white power structure and what's called the master narrative. He wasn't able to break free from the shackles of the master narrative and graduate himself to the next level from Negro League to the Major League Baseball. So we see a lot of people, their development being arrested too within There. His development, his mental health affected by his inability to achieve what he wanted to achieve. Individuals within There have the same sort of arrested development where they can't achieve what they want to achieve, both as a culture, but also as a singularity, as a people, and as an individuals within that group. So interwoven theme, even a technique to build character of Troy, all resulting in the social commentary on black urban men of this time period being subjected to deteriorated mental health. We could see this being exemplified through Troy. and the cast of characters that not only surround him, but contribute to the existence of his character. They help build who he is as he reacts to them within his environment, the setting of the 1950s in Pittsburgh. So some connections can be made. The urbanness is a strong connection one can make. The corollary between these two texts, they're there, and Fences, right? They're both, there's ideas of the urbanization of individual. How does that give one agency, or how does it strip them away of that, right? We can see within there the idea of the urban indigenous individuals, the urban Native American, right? Fluctuating back and forth from their past identity on the reservation, the res, versus their urban identity. And certainly we see that with the black urban male existing, that black urban family of this era, of this setting, which is the 1950s, and the connections that can be made between the two things, the two ideas of those, of that identity one extrapolates from that environment. And just to drive that point home, so in a minute we're about to get into deep uh, sort of literary theory, literary criticism called deconstructionism. But just to draw, but in this will help sort of frame that argument that one can approach it through the lens and press it through the prism that is deconstructionism, if one wanted to within this class. But it's important to be exposed to some level of literary theory, I think, in any English class that you undertake. So just to press this idea home of urbanization and sort of the failed binary that exists, and that's when we're getting to theory, the binary oppositions that comes by way of literary theory in a moment. But we have a lot of sort of the idea of blackness and the fence, and what does that symbolize? And how can that be compared uh, not only to the 1950s, which is the setting of this in Pittsburgh. Fences explores the experience of one black man and his family living in an area of segregation and a burgeoning black rights movement. If you remember, it would be maybe a decade later that we really start to see social rights movement for African American individuals within the United States, especially the South. And it exposes at its heart is the character's psychology, a dynamic between the inner world of a black community and the expanse of the white power around it. The fence, what does it all mean? This blackness in the fence, right? The fence, which Torrey gradually builds in front of his house, serves as a symbol of segregation, as well as a general psychological need to build a fortress where a black inside or interior can set itself off from the white dominated world around it, that white power structure I spoke about, that master narrative that perpetuates. From one angle, the fence represents the geographical effects of segregation in general, the fencing off of blacks, the creation of ethnic insularity in certain neighborhoods, and it is a monument to this basic social division affected by white economic and political powers. Both, it's universal, this idea, isn't it? It seems. I mean, we're seeing it now with Black Lives Matter. This idea, we think it's generational, or maybe it's an anomaly of some sort. But no, these are universal things that one dominating power, in this case, the white power structure, will attempt uh, to wield its power on those individuals that we consider marginalized. Okay, so yet Troy also builds the fence himself. It's largely his own creation, though Rose, his wife, initially tasked him with building it. Rose wants the fence in order to set her and her family off from the outside world, to protect a private interior of their experienced lived black experience from an outside world threatening to invade it, and from the division effects which white power inflicts upon society. While the latter divides with the aim of controlling and limiting black prosperity and influence, the division affected by Troy's fence is one of protection and an affirmation of the world within it. Okay. Throughout the play, we also see how its characters are forced to define their world in terms of how it's limited by races, systems of white social and economic power. We see that Troy's workplace, for instance, is organized according to a racial hierarchy, privileging whites, since exclusively white men are hired to drive the company's garbage trucks, while black men are only hired as garbage collectors. It's one of my favorite scenes of the play, is that scene where he's sort of verbally grappling back and forth with his boss about why. And he's speaking as an uneducated man, you could tell the language. I mean, I think August Wilson does an amazing job in casting the language, the dialogue back and forth to really explain how Troy is not really, he's in a lot of ways somewhat intellectually challenged, a simple man really, but a man universally stands in place, symbolizes many men of this time and they're on the margins of society. Anyway, he eventually makes his case and the playwright eventually allows him to become that driver, to enter the white world, right? Much of the character's speech relies on pointing out that their status as people of color in order to describe their position in relation to the white power. So that binary opposition that we're going to look at in a moment or expand on through deconstructionism. Wilson's play, therefore, in part, concerns itself with depicting how racism governs and structures the everyday lives of its characters in order to expose, through the concrete experience of one family, racism's many effects on the Black American community of the 1950s at large. The meaning behind and need for the fence and the play's exposure of a black world in many ways defines by its oppression are a scathing condemnation of the division and pain inflicted by white power. So it seems like, wow, you can really make some strong connections with these things that you can see here, just bulletized on the screen. Symbolism, segregation, white-dominated world, ethnic insularity, so segregating oneself off either by either own self-segregation or segregation by society, as we see with reservations. Protection and self-preservation. Racism is a governing structure. It just is a regular part of the substructure of society that one has frustration and transgression towards automatically, right? You have to if you exist within that world. So a psychological complexity of a racist world. A lot of strong connections can be made here between fences and Tommy Orange's there. So fences, as you know, when you're reading it, gives a palpable reality to the abstract mechanisms of racism and white power. It reveals the pain of, as well as the aspirations and opportunities withheld from its black characters, much as what we see within there with the indigenous community, the Native American community, and how the opportunities are withheld from them. Some of it is self-inflicted, of course, but a lot of it is from the structure that is put in place. Through framing pain as being at the heart of almost all its characters' lives, Wilson, the playwright, reveals the psychological complexity and intensely tiresome and tasking nature of navigating a racist world divided principally between white and black. At the same time, he reveals how that division divides black themselves through the pain it inflicts upon them, such as Troy's conflict with Corey over his desire to play football. We touched upon that with his own past, reconciling his own past with baseball, since Troy's parenting is informed by his past experience of a discrimination, of moving up through the ranks from the Negro League to the Major League level. Many of these themes are reminiscent of there, as we mentioned, where we had similar class ethnic divisions within the indigenous community. These divisions, like fences, come from within, but also from without. Okay, so I don't want to get into too much of the weeds, down in the weeds of some of the really complex ideas of literary theory and literary criticism, but I think it's important that we do talk about some of these ideas. So deconstructivism, as you can see here, is an approach to understanding the relationship between a text and its meaning. So it's used a lot, even if we don't necessarily define it as deconstructionism or structuralism or post-structuralism, we are using that idea when we read a text like there, or like fences, or like Black Zodiac, and then we extrapolate from, we pull from it the various meanings, whether it's the themes we explore, the language, we drill down on the language to understand what exactly the author is attempting to say. How is it culturally connected, the language, in terms of our understanding of it? So the text and its meaning is a very important idea of deconstructionism. It was originated by the philosophers, you see here, Jacques Derrida, who defined the term variously throughout his career, sometimes even contradicted if you look at the inception of it and then where it sort of evolved. But in its simplest form, it can be regarded as a criticism of Plato, of Platonism. Plato, of course, was a 3rd century BC Greek philosopher, but Plato preached the idea, or taught the idea, I wouldn't say preached, but he taught the idea of forms or essences that exist in our world, which takes precedence over appearances. So for instance, Plato believed that we inherently as humans have an understanding of what a tree is. There's a form of a tree in our minds or in our spirit or in our soul that we all agree upon that is made up of branches, sometimes they have leaves, and they grow from the ground, right? But Derrida, on the other hand, believe we have to look at the language that's assembled around it within any given text or or archive in order to understand what existence is. And we're going to look at that in a simplest form in a moment. But just know that deconstruction instead places the emphasis on appearance, or suggests at least that essence is to be found in appearances. So within, and in our case, in an English class, in an academic setting, we were completely structured that around language. So just to read in the bullet points here, deconstruction is a method of critical analysis, philosophical and literary language. Deconstruction is a strategy of critical questioning directed towards exposing unquestionable metaphysical assumptions, so assumptions about our world, our existence in it, the metaphysical assumptions. Internal contradictions in philosophical arguments, and then of course we're going to look at literary language. So deconstruction involves a certain attention of structure and tries to understand how an ensemble was constituted. So the ensemble, we might think using deconstruction, the ensemble that exists with the characters. These characters within there, and within Fences are an ensemble that are dynamic towards each other. They build off each other. We see that within the very structure of there, being each chapter dedicated towards a different person that's part of the greater ensemble, what we call the panoply or the mosaic effect that Tommy Orange is using to construct his novel. As both a structuralist and an anti-structuralist, so structuralism was what graduated out of deconstructionism. But Derrida argued that there are some things that deconstructionism does that is a lot like structuralist theory, but a lot of it is not. But we're not going to get too much into that. You feel free at your leisure to look up structuralism. So just know that structuralism is tied up with what Derrida calls the structural problematic. The structural problematic for Derrida is the tension between genesis, so the existence, the creation of something, that which is the essential mode of creation or movement, and the structure, the systems or complexes or static configurations. So we might want to think about the idea of language and character, especially with these novels. How is the language within there different from the language within Fences? They both represent the deconstruction of us looking into them internally, both at setting, right? They are different in some ways because of setting. One's in the 1950s, one's part of the Black community, and then the other one's part of our own contemporaneous era, right? Right now is when there was written. In this moment of our own era, the setting is. So they differ in some ways, but they maybe are, if you deconstruct and look closely at the language, we can find commonalities between the urban individual, the urban male, the urbanism, despite it being, maybe 60 years separated in terms of a timeline. But also we could see the binary oppositions. And that's one of the main points I want to make. So an example of structure of deconstructionism, that doesn't confuse you enough. Just think of just deconstructionism. Think of deconstructionism just like we're going to take a text, an artifact, which is a text, just like Fences, just like there, and we're going to deconstruct it. We're going to pull it apart, parse from it the various attributes and elements of fiction. But an important example, an important idea to deconstruct something, to parse it or pull it apart, would be looking at the binary oppositions of the text. So how often do we see the word white within Fences? It's quite a bit, right? It's this Black urban commentary of the 1950s segregation and the segregation of the Black community and their inability to escape the white power structure and the hierarchy that is in place. So we could see the tension that exists, that Derrida wanted us to understand within text, the tension that exists between those two binaries that oppose each other, the binary oppositions of whiteness, white power structure, and blackness, Black urbanization, segregation of that time. And we can see the same thing within the indigenous African or Native American community within there. Think just as binary oppositions as the very simplest of things that oppose each other: white, black, good, bad, up, down. But both of them don't have to be stated within a text for you to understand the binary opposition. So August Wilson through Troy, his character Troy, didn't necessarily ever have to mention the word white within the confines of the play fences. But we can extrapolate whiteness from it as a governing structure, right? Just by the mentioning of black, of being urban, of being segregated. We can see that segregation is the opposing force of freedom, of being exposed, of being having the ability to access any part of society without being subjected to gatekeepers, or in this case, through his job, the hierarchy that's in place that is a gatekeeper that holds him back from really becoming fully who he wants to be. Same way with with the Negro League, right? Not being able to break away from that hierarchy, those gatekeepers that wouldn't allow him to play in the Major League Baseball. So moving forward, just think about these ideas. You won't write an entire paper just on the binary oppositions that exist within fences. Not even as comparative literature to there, right? Which is another way, another avenue, another door into how we can write our final essay if we choose to within this class. All right. So I took a little longer than 5 minutes. My apologies. It's a short lecture, despite that withstanding. Please think about these concepts that we just spoke about. Email me if you have any questions or any concerns. Look for your grades to be updated within Blackboard by Thursday. And just let me know if you have any questions. Talk to you guys later.